So here's the thing. I discovered quite recently that I really like terrariums. You can get very creative setting them up. You can use lots of different techniques and different materials. And once you've done a little bit of homework and know that everything that you put inside is safe for plants and for animals if you keep some, then all you need to do is add some light, a bit of water, and trim the plants as needed. So I looked online, and I found a very good deal for a second-hand large terrarium, and I will need a base and a canopy for it. This will be my very first woodworking project other than making cabinets for my workshop. I'm going to use oak, and I'm sure I will find a lot of challenges and difficulties, and I will make a lot of mistakes. And that's why I'm trying to keep the design as simple as possible, even though I want to try one or two things just to see how far I can go. So, well, wish me luck, because I'm going to set up a terrarium. I've always admired the work of Frank Lloyd Wright, and that's where I'm taking a very loose inspiration from, with some Japanese influence into it. Now, for my main job as a model maker, I draw things in 2D from plans, sections and elevations, and that's the same principle I'm applying to this project. Everything is in one place. It looks a bit messy, but it makes perfect sense to me, and I can try a few ideas and measure up elements and components. I have a long experience using workshop machinery, but one machine I hardly ever used is the thickesser, which I actually recently got. This machine, despite the size, weighs a ton, so I came with the idea of fitting it onto a bike lift, and that works quite well, even though it needs to be locked in place, otherwise it tends to slip down again after a while. Nevertheless, at this stage, I don't have a planer or a jointer, as they call it in the US of A, so I need to use a sled and fix the boards on its surface with hot glue after placing some spacers to ensure that it won't be pushed down by the thicknesser when I joint the top surface. Needless to say, this was my very first time buying some hardwood, and here in UK we don't really have these shops and stores where you can choose yourself from a wide variety of different hardwoods in rough sawn boards. You either have places that are selling live edge boards and see what they have, or you have other places where you call and tell them what you need and they will prepare it for you. So really you don't know what you're getting until you get there and you place your order, and you will have to complain if you're not happy about it. But for someone like me who's a new starter, that's also very difficult and a bit daunting. Anyway, after a lot of thinking, I went for the live edge route, and I made my choice and pretended to know exactly what I was getting, even if I had no idea whatsoever, and eventually it worked actually quite well. Dude, you just drop a board! I did say you need to glue them very, very firmly. That was a proper rookie mistake. Anyway, I find this process extremely tedious and cumbersome, and for someone like me with zero patience, it is also very, very taxing and really makes me wish I had a planer, which is probably going to be my very next purchase, at least in 1 or 2 projects' time, so to speak. But yes, once enough passes have been done and all the top surface is completely planed and flat, it will be eventually time to flip them over, mark the surface and use the thicknesser the way it's intended to plane the other surface and make sure that it's perfectly parallel to the first one. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for saving money and being ingenious about what you already have. It's just that wasting all this time in milling the wood makes me feel bored and makes me lose enthusiasm about the following stages, which are definitely more interesting and exciting. Once all the flat faces have been done and they're parallel to each other, it's time to trim the vertical faces, and since I don't have a planer, as I already may have mentioned, or maybe not. I'm gonna use my sled on the table saw to cut the first one, and then I will be using the table saw on its own to cut the last one, at which point all the boards will be perfectly square and with 4 perpendicular faces. Now, I need to apologize, but I was so nervous about my first glue up that I totally forgot to film it. So here is me planing the joints a little bit. I couldn't use any dominoes or any biscuits to locate and fix the planks, and that's because of the way I'm going to treat the surface of these boards. So I'm just refining the surface with a hand planer, used in the wrong way, as you can see, but it works for me, and that's pretty much the only way I can get it to work. But once the surface is completely flat, I can finally trim the panel to its final dimensions. And that requires 2 long cuts on the table saw and 2 short cuts on the cross-cut sled. I love this tool, it's absolutely amazing, by the way. As I mentioned, I'm going to treat the top surface of these panels in a particular way. In particular, I decided to route some rounded channels in the vertical direction. And for this reason, I need to measure the intervals I will need to set the fence on the router table. Now, the idea behind it is to route the board symmetrically, doing one side and the other, and then moving towards the middle. Problem is that setting the fence on the router table is not as accurate as the table saw, and that meant that when I came to the middle, it didn't quite work as well as I thought it would, but it was still quite decent and acceptable, I would say. Moving towards the middle meant that the board started lifting over the router bit because the featherboard wasn't exerting enough pressure, and therefore I had to add some extra pressure myself. What you've seen now is not a glitch in the matrix. There is 2 of these panels, one for each side of the cabinet, of course. But eventually I'm getting there and I'm almost done with this process. I'm sure I did it wrong and probably the bit wasn't the best quality, but the result is that I got a lot of burn marks, and for someone like me with absolute zero patience, did I mention that already? Did I? That meant finding every possible tool in my workshop to try and get rid of those, and that meant rounding over all the sharp edges that initially I wanted for these panels. That said, I mean, it didn't look bad once I was finished with this horrible process, and therefore I was quite happy to carry on and not start from scratch. Done that, all I had to do is adding a rebate on the edges so it can be fixed on the frame, which I'm going to be building next. For the frame of the cabinet, I got some thicker stock, but as you can see, it's very heavily capped, and therefore, instead of milling as it is, I decided to cut the pieces to their almost final size, and this allows me to have a lot less wastage. Obviously, it's a much more tedious process because it means that I need to mill them twice on the table saw. And by now you know the drill. Once I got them all done, it's time to pass them in the thicknesser, first on the sled and then without, and then on the saw, first on the sled and then again on the saw using the fence, which is what you're seeing now. I decided to add a bit of a chamfer to the front legs, You probably saw me jogging it on the CAD at the beginning of this video, and now it's time to do it for real. And for this reason, I'm yet again using my sled on the table saw, marking the entry and exit point, placing it correctly, clamping it down and running it on the saw. I finally got all the parts of the frame ready, and it's now time for a layout so I can choose the best surfaces to show on the exterior of the cabinet. At this stage it's extremely important to mark up everything, all the pieces and how they go together, and this is something that I found that is very easy to mess up. As you can see, I'm going to use dominoes to join this up. I was quite hesitant about getting a domino jointer. I know there's a lot of controversy about it. To be honest, the cost is high, but I got a very good deal second hand, and I cannot say it's a magic wand. It doesn't do the job for you, but it takes a lot of weight off my shoulders as a beginner, because cutting the tenons and the joints, it's very long and very difficult, and very distracting when you really want to focus on the design and the final result of what you're doing. I suppose for a professional it's also a very powerful tool, because it lets you cut time down and optimize profits. So I think it's a win-win for many reasons, and at the end of the day we all want nice tools, so if we get a chance to get them, then why not? This is the moment a very experienced woodworker will do a dry fit just to check that everything goes in place. But first of all, I didn't have enough timber to remake it all over again in case something was wrong. I also didn't want to make the timber all over again, so I just decided to go on and rock it and put glue in the tenons and go on with the assembling and pray for the best. And with all clamped down, you can also see me pretending to measure up if everything is square. Eventually it was pretty much square, but to be honest, I would have not known what to do exactly in case something it wasn't. So I'm just banging things around a little bit and make everything align a little bit better, but I mean not substantially better, just good enough. So happy dance. And it's now time to cut the rebate for the side panels so that the two parts will slot together nicely eventually. One thing I find very interesting about woodworking is that it doesn't matter how many videos you watch, how many pages you read, and how many questions you ask. You always find yourself second-guessing yourself at every single stage of what you're doing, whether it's going to work or not. And this is one of those, definitely. At this point, I have decided to glue the panels into the rebates, and I'm not really sure that this is going to work over time. Nobody really can tell. Well, probably an experienced woodworker would, but I don't have any better tool other than taking a big breath and trying my luck. So I am spreading the glue very religiously, and I will eventually drop the panel in there, and I will even fix it with some bread nails. And I suppose time will tell if this was a very bad choice or not. That being said, I mean, look at those beauties. I'm fairly happy with the final result, even if I can see all the defects, all the blemishes, and I can remember all the struggles I had along the way. I can't help but being a bit proud of it. Now that the two side panels are finally completed, it's time to start putting the whole thing together, and that's gonna be quite a task. You would assume that I did some pre-fitting at least at this stage, but no, yet again, I'm in the final rush and nothing is gonna stop me. So go down with some glue and push the thing together and hope that it comes together. Spoiler alert, it won't quite, but I eventually managed to fix it and straighten things up a bit, to the point that no one could tell that I did mess this thing up quite a lot. Anyway, let's carry on. I'm only gluing down 3 of the braces. Are they called braces, these connection elements? I don't really know, I don't really remember. Anyway, I'm only assembling 3 of those because first I need to slide the backing in place, and here it goes. I forgot to film the time where I slide it in, but now I am eventually sticking in the 4th brace. Well, whatever it's called, it's time to clamp this thing down and go to bed, waiting for the next day and the next final stage. And it's now a new day, and it's time to glue the door together. I milled some more timber. This stock is very, very thin, and I'm still using dominoes to join it together, even if it didn't work quite as well as the thicker stock, just because the dominoes were almost as thick as the components. But eventually it did work, and it did come up quite nicely, so I can't really complain. On the front of the door, I'm adding some strips, mocking up a bit of a shoji panel. These components weren't done properly. I mean, I didn't have a proper setup, and I didn't have the will to learn how to make shoji panel just for these 4 little bits. So I kind of rushed into the process, and I'm just sticking those strips on the top surface of the door. And well, hopefully they will stay in place over time. The result is not bad. It's quite pleasing to the eyes, and well, who needs weights when you have drills? That's job done, I suppose, for today. I got to say, working and filming at the same time is very difficult, and one thing I find very easy is forgetting about filming some stuff, mostly because I get stressed about the process of making those components. Anyway, I forgot to film how I made the top for the cabinet, but it didn't miss much. It's a piece of MDF veneered on top with oak, and has a big molding made of oak around the edges. This time I thought I would allow for wood movement, even if probably there isn't any, so instead of gluing the top, I am screwing it on with some braces. Regarding the canopy, which is another thing I totally forgot to film, I am now fitting the electrics, which only consist of a fan and an aquarium light. Both will be working on a timer controlled via Bluetooth, and therefore I have absolute control of what's happening inside the terrarium. I'm placing the brackets so that I can actually remove the light anytime should I need to replace it or to change it or to fix it. And it's finally the end of the process. I can get into building the terrarium itself. First of all, I need to cut a hole in the bottom for the drainage of the dirty water. This is something I found very, very scary, but eventually it's actually easier than it looks. It just takes time, and you just need to remind yourself that the drill eventually will do the work, not you. But hey, I managed not to crack the glass, and I got through it, and everything worked fine. And I need a corresponding cut on the top of the cabinet to allow for the hose to go down into the reservoir. And it's time to fit the bulkhead for the 1/4-inch pipe. This is probably the most fun and less stressing part of this project. I got some willow branches from my garden, and it's time to make a layout and start sorting out the landscape for the interior of the terrarium. That's kind of a long process, but I'll take my time and enjoy every little bit of it. Once I'm happy with the position of the branches, it's time to consolidate the whole design using expanding foam. This is black expanding foam, which is normally used for ponds, so it's safe for animals and plants. And I also added some pots which I filled with paper, so they won't be filled by the foam when it expands. As you can see, once it's dry, it looks all quite glossy and lumpy and unnatural, and that brings me to the next stage, which is carving it with a knife to create a more rocky appearance. With the carving completed, it's time to spread some silicone all over the surface and cover everything with crushed coconut fiber. This silicone is also aquarium safe, so it won't cause any problems to the plants and the animals in the terrarium, but until it's dry it's very stinky, so you need to wear a mask and protect your lungs because it can be very toxic. It also needs to be left for at least a week before you can introduce any sort of life form into the terrarium. As you can see, the sides are quite unsightly because you can see all the expanding foam. I also use some regular expanding foam because I ran out of the black one. But because the sides of the terrarium will be visible in my setup, I am going to spray the sides with black peelable paint just to cover the foam. The rest will be left transparent. So I'm loosely cutting the shape with some masking tape, and I'm not bothering masking the rest of the glass because being the paint peelable, it means I can just rub off any of spray. And the dirty and stinky part of the job is done, so I can finally move the terrarium in its final position and I can proceed with completing the substrate. This is the false bottom, which is made of crushed lava rock at the front and a big sponge at the back, and this takes care of the drainage so the soil doesn't get too damp, causing problems both for plants and for the frogs. For the plant substrate, I'm using a recipe I found online, which is made of potting soil, bark, active carbon, and then I'm adding some perlite and some crushed lava rock, which will help with drainage. The dosage on the recipe was just indicative, and so I'm going by eye pretty much, and I'm feeling with my hands, making sure that the soil feels nicely loose and with a nice consistency all over. To ensure the soil doesn't penetrate the drainage layer, or the false bottom as I said before, you need to add a bit of weed membrane. This one is green, but normally it comes in black. It doesn't make a difference because you will cover it completely and you won't see any of it. With this done, it's time for some final touches, and then it all will be covered with some leaf litter and then the plants. It's really nice and rewarding taking your time, fitting everything and making sure that you like every single detail. Obviously, once the plants are in place, like you see now, they will grow and eventually the design will change and evolve over time. But this project is finally completed and I am actually very happy with it. It looks great, it smells great. As you can see, I added some holes in the front door, and this is because after some time I decided to add a little caddy on the inside to host all the vitamins and the fruit fly cultures for the frogs. While inside the cabinets, you can probably just see in the darkness, I got my misting machine and the dirt water reservoir plus some electrics. So here it is, the little caddy in all its splendor. I let everything settle down for about a month before getting the frogs, but finally they're here. They look amazing. I'm very happy with them. They're a bit shy at the moment, but hopefully they will enjoy their house as much as I enjoy making it for them. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you like this video and what I do, and please, if you do, hit subscribe and I'll see you next time.
Mm-hmm.